All right, so go ahead and start by opening a new Excel workbook and fill in what you see here. In column A, you will have name, period, and the name of the assignment is empirical rule. So you put your name, class period, and put empirical rule. We're also about column D. You're going to have mean and standard deviation.p. We're going to be putting the values for this in these cells. So I'm going to paint those yellow, and we're going to be putting some calculations here using those numbers. So I'll give you a moment to copy what you see here, and then we can go on. Once you get this copied, I'm also going to provide you a data set that has about 300 measurements in it. And I know that's overkill, but I want to show you something, and it's going to be the best way to see it clearly. So open the file raw feet, and what we're going to do is select all of the numbers. We have feet and inches. We're going to use Control Shift and down arrow and select all of that data. Control C to copy the data, and then we go back over here and we go paste that information under feet and inches. It should look like this when you're done. And if you go to the bottom of that, you should see row 307 about. The next thing I want to do is fill in a series here. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to select those three. I'm going to double click when this turns into a black cross right there. And what that does is it looks at the series and predicts that what you're going to do is count to 300. And then we need to calculate the total number of inches. If this is 9 feet and these are the number of inches, so this would have been a measurement that was 9 feet, 9.8 inches long. So to do this calculation, we're going to go equals, open a parenthesis, this first value times 12 to turn that into inches, and add the number of inches. So that turns into 117.8. I want to do the same calculation all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to double click right here, and it goes to the bottom. Now let's perform some calculations using these. I want to calculate the mean of the values in column F on my data table here. So we're going to use the function equals average, and we're going to choose this number, the first inches value, and go all the way to the bottom. Shift, Control, down arrow, hit return, and now we have an average. I also want to calculate the standard deviation of the population. We'll put in the function for that, standard deviation.p, open the parenthesis, click on the first inches, shift control down arrow, close the parenthesis, hit enter. So now we see this formula, and we see this formula, okay? Now what I want to do is establish a lower and an upper limit. This is related to the empirical rule. This is a breakdown of the empirical rule, and this presentation is available to you at mypltw.org. This is a distribution if you have a normal distribution. So you have the mean in the center, and the slope of the bell curve goes away evenly on both sides. In the red zone, 68% of your data will fall in that red zone, and that is plus or minus 1 standard deviation of the mean. And in the green zone, this is plus or minus 2 standard deviations, and it represents 95% of your data. And then in the blue zone, from here to here, that represents 99.7% of the data within plus or minus 3 standard deviations. Anything outside of that is considered an outlier. For the purposes of this experiment, we're doing a quality control exercise, and we want to identify any value that is outside of plus or minus 2 standard deviations, because it's not going to work with our process. What I did previously in this class, we built puzzle cubes, and if the size of the cubes were outside of plus or minus 2 standard deviations of your mean, when you constructed the cube, it tended to have trouble fitting together and you had to sand a lot. So this was a way that we used to screen out the quote-unquote bad cubes before we built our cube. Okay, let's continue with this exercise. All right, so what I want to do is find what the mean plus 2 standard deviations is. So what we're going to do is hit equal and take 2 times the standard deviation, and we're going to add that to the mean. So 2 times the standard deviation plus the mean. And that's going to be our upper limit. And then here we're going to have the mean minus 2 standard deviations. So we're going to put equal, and we click on the value for mean, and we're going to subtract 2 times that standard deviation. The reason I'm using this instead of the descriptive statistics, if I change these values, then these values will update. Also, in descriptive statistics, the standard deviation is a sample, not a population standard deviation. So, what I want to do now, and I haven't found a better way to do this, so we're just going to do this to make it show up on the chart the way I want. So we're going to, right here, where we want the upper limit, we're going to hit equals, and we're going to click on upper limit, which is in this spreadsheet, G2, and I'm going to hit function F4 and put $signs in front of it, and now that is the upper limit. And then for the lower limit, we're going to hit equals and click on the lower limit and hit shift, or no, not shift, function F4 on your keyboards and put $signs in front of that, making it an absolute reference. All right, I'm going to highlight these two, double click right here when I have a black cross like this, double click right there, and it copies those values down, you guessed it, all the way down to 307. All right, now what we're going to do, this series, the columns labeled series, all the way, to make these bold, these are the columns we're going to put into a scatter plot. We have the series to keep the data in order. We have the values for inches, and these are going to put 2 lines on our graph showing the upper and lower boundaries. So I'm going to highlight all 4 of these columns. So I start on the word series, shift control, down arrow, and then holding shift and control, I go right 1 time. And that highlights all of the data. I'm going to go all the way back to the top, just use the scroll bar. And then I'm going to choose insert. I'm going to find the chart type scatter, and I'm going to choose the scatter plot. Click on that, and it makes this lovely little chart. So this is a scatter plot, so I'm going to change the chart title to scatter plot. To make it easier to see, I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. I'm going to zoom out, control and scroll, and we can make it a little bit larger. And I'm going to zoom in on that now so we can see a little bit about that. All right, one thing I don't like, it starts at 0 and goes, well, that's not too bad. Okay, let's just run with it like this. So what this represents is all of my data. I have 300 data points. And these lines are established at plus or minus 2 standard deviations. Then anything outside of those, I'm calling a questionable data point. So in this case, like right here, I have one that's okay, and then one not much more than that. So like if I look at this data point, not that one. These data points, for the purposes of our screening, would need to be eliminated. And then these data points, for the purposes of our screening, would need to be eliminated. So out of 300 objects, we would eliminate these 5 and these 5, and that's 10 altogether. And that's what we would need to drop out to have everything in an appropriate specification. So this is what I want you to do. Oh, we need to add some labels because look, it doesn't tell us here's our series, but we need to know that these are measurements in inches. So I'm going to click on this chart. I'm going to hit on this plus, and let's move it over a little bit so you can see. Hit on this plus, and then we want to add a axis title. for the primary, let's just go ahead and type it in. All right, so let's review what we have done. So we put our name, period, and empirical rule assignment here, and then we added these titles in blue. We copied some data here, 300 rows. We added the series. We converted the feet and inches to overall inches. We identified the upper and lower boundaries for plus or minus 2 standard deviations, and then we generated a scatter plot of this data and added some labels for inches and series. So this is what I want you to do with this raw data. You should have something that looks just like this when you're done. I'm going to be checking the formulas and then also your chart setup. So make sure your formulas are correct. Once you're done, save it as a file name you will recognize and turn it in.